month of November that was launched by the Teaching and Learning Center, and very excited to be looking at how we can start integrating social justice pedagogy throughout John Jay. And so we have a really fun, I think, run of show today. We are going to do some intros around our definitions of social justice pedagogy. And then we're going to talk about some norms and use parallel process and do an exercise that we actually do in our classrooms. And then brainstorm a discussion about how education can be unjust, right? And then Adriana, Ida, and Emily will talk about research that was done with ISP faculty and students about what makes ISP unique in terms of being able to address injustice in the classroom. And then we'll apply those findings to our own classroom experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Can everyone hear me? Can everyone
Yes.
hear me? Okay, awesome. So my name is Ida Lomri. I have yet to have met Christy, but I certainly know Amy. So it's very nice to meet you. My name is Ida Lomri. I'm a senior at John Jay College. I study political science, and what social justice pedagogy means to me in the classroom is that students and teachers get to learn from each other and create change both within the classroom and outside the classroom.
Hi, my name is Emily Chavez. I'm a sophomore at John Jay. I'm also a political science major. I've had Amy Green for first year, and I'm having Professor Carter right now for ISP Technology and Culture. I really enjoy those classes. But yeah, social justice pedagogy, it's all about communication to me, and it makes a difference really in the classroom. It helps the student grow as well as help the professors grow in a way.
Mm-hmm. So we definitely know each other pretty well. It seems like we're, but we still would love to sort of like do an icebreaker. Oh, Musabika. Welcome, Musabika. Hello. And Richard. Okay, so while they jump.
Welcome, Musabika. Hi, Richard.
So while they join, we can start. We would love to hear, who you are, what department you teach in, even though it's pretty obvious that we're all from the same place, except for Musabika, which is awesome. And we would love to hear, what does social justice in the classroom mean to you? If you could just say a few words, that would be awesome. We're going to take notes on that, and that will get to know each other even better. Thank you, Nina, for describing that. So go ahead, whoever wants to start. What does social justice in the classroom mean to you?
We'd love to hear, as Adriana requested, your name, your department,
yeah,
and your definition.
I guess, should I start? Richard Hoare.
Hi, Richard, welcome.
Thank you. I just got out the shower, sorry. Department of Interdisciplinary Studies. I think partnering with the students to make knowledge, something I'm interested in doing in the classroom is having students think about and research their own sort of histories, and try to sort of instill the idea that their own lives are part of important historical trends, and empowering them in that way. And I think that's on some level sort of social justice is to include the students or bring them forward as co-creators, co-learners, co-investigators into knowledge. So you're always sort of sharing, and hopefully instilling in them a sense of their own importance and the importance of their stories.
Cool. Wonderful.
I can add to that. All of what Richard said, and for me, part of social justice is making sure that we are representing the students experience, not only in our content, which is super important, but also in the room, whatever they bring into the room, is an important piece of
Asset.
historical fact, of information, of perspective. And the other piece of it for me is to open all of our awareness of social injustice. And on the flip side of that, to talk about ways that we all can be agents of justice, of social.
Great. Awesome.
I can
Who wants to? Hi, Musabika. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Musabika. I'm a staff member. I'll have my camera on shortly. So I'm a staff member. I'm working with the new Middle East Studies minor, which the history department is hosting. So I'm joining just to see, you know, how I can be more responsible in my student outreach duties. I'm also a recent graduate, so I just graduated in September. So I'm kind of coming. Thank you.
Congrats.
Wonderful
I think I'm coming at this question more as a student than as a faculty member. But to me, I think one of the most important things my professors have done for me is to disrupt the idea that the knowledge that I've been taught, or the way of creating knowledge that I've been taught, is the only way to do it, which I think Richard touched on. And I think one other aspect of social justice teaching, which is really important, is to not to burden students with the responsibility of doing the professor's job, because that usually falls on the most minoritized students who are already struggling with this burden in so many aspects of life.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
Could you, Musabika, could you say a little bit more about that? What you mean?
An example would be awesome.
Students doing the professor's job. I'm really.
Yeah, I think it's tricky because, of course, it's important to listen to students, right? But I think sometimes, in my experience and the experience of my peers, sometimes professors expect the students to take the risk, I would say, or to be the dissenting voice. And I think it's important to allow space for that, but also like maybe provide support while that's happening. I think this is something to think through more, and I haven't really fully thought it through. I don't really have a solution.
That's okay. I'm going to be thinking about it. I think that's very, very important. Thank you.
Who else? Okay, we have something in the chat from Gina. Thank you, Gina. Reciprocity Accountability Alliance.
Awesome.
Okay.
And I think we would just have Katie and Christy, and then Adriana, if you want to share too, and I can share. That would be helpful.
Yeah.
So I can go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing this on my iPad and it's not working very well, but can people hear me? Is that?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, okay. All right. So I like what everyone said, and I'm thinking a lot about this issue of who shoulders the burden of risk is placed on. I think that's really important. And so I mean, to kind of add to that as I'm thinking aloud here, but I think that a just classroom is one where we as professors need to model a level of risk and vulnerability for them that they can understand is okay, that there are things that can be done from that position of taking a risk, but we should definitely not be sort of just asking them to do it without sort of providing some kind of framework for how it looks, and we can be modeling that. And I'm also thinking more about what it means to, I really, we're talking about social justice in the classroom, but I also want to think about how that works as a just classroom, and I haven't completely worked that out, but part of it has to do with rethinking some of the hierarchies that students come into the classroom sort of understanding as the default, in terms of who has the authority and what they're supposed to do and what we're supposed to tell them. And we do have knowledge to share with them, and we need to sort of have space for that, but we also have to be able to make space for what's really supposed to be happening, which is not us delivering something, but students learning like what their powers are to, to deliver to the rest of the world. So yeah, that's just what I've been thinking.
Nina, do you want to share? Do you want me to share my definition?
I'd love for you. Emily, did Emily get to share yet?
I don't think so. Emily,
yeah.
Did you share already?
Don't confuse me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought there was another Emily in the social justice in the classroom, it really means a lot of things to me, but I think one thing that should be pointed out that helps move a classroom along is communication. Students are kind of scared to talk to their professors because they might be second thinking their decision to even talk to them. So I feel like if professors open up, and say that they can be reached at any moment, any questions, it'll help the classroom become a better environment for both the student and professor.
Awesome. I think
Can I add something?
Yes, of course.
As I was thinking while Christy was talking and have been thinking about for a long time, in some respects, as long as we are giving the assignments and offering the grades and following all the rules that John Jay and CUNY expect us to follow in terms of assessing students, I think there's a real contradiction there between social justice pedagogy and the structure of kind of the more technical things,
bureaucracy.
the bureaucracy that we have to follow. Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, my students and I would decide what the curriculum would be and what our standards are, and design the rubric together, and really have them empowered to learn. It's very Freirean, right? You go into the community, you ask the community, what do you need, and build from there. And we don't do that. Like we have a social justice genie or angel sitting on our shoulder while we're doing all the prepping, but we're really not building the curriculum or the quote unquote standards for grading with our students. So that seems to me, that's a place I've kind of been stuck in for a couple of years now. So I'd love to hear what other people think about that. Thank you.
I definitely, I don't have an answer to that. I also think that there's a big tension in between what we sort of like would love to do in terms of having social justice in our classrooms and what we need to do to fulfill, administrative duties and whatever. And I have very little to add other than, for me, and this always, I think it comes from my own experience as a first generation student, social justice in the classroom also feels to me that like a responsibility to make sure that my students know that whatever their experiences are, whatever their knowledge, is, whatever their level is, it's definitely a valid platform to keep building knowledge. That there's no sense that you lack all these things, right? That's it.
Yeah, I love that, and I agree. It's really being present with students and honoring students' experience and expertise. And I love what Richard said around students research their own histories, their lives that are part of historical trends and policies and practices, that we all have innate knowledge, right, about social injustice and about what social justice could look like, and that we all bring that together to the classroom to co-create knowledge and also solutions to our most challenging issues. And I'm really excited because I think we'll get some time, hopefully before the end, to talk about some of these tensions around grading and bureaucracies and vulnerability and risk. This is wonderful themes that we will be definitely addressing throughout the workshop.
Musabika, did you have your hand up? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I did raise it briefly. I just wanted to add on to just one point, inspired by this conversation that's going on about the tensions and the contradictions that exist here. And I think it's really important for educators to be very open about the fact that social justice doesn't end at the classroom, and that academia isn't like this solution to social justice, that organizing, all of this has to happen outside the classroom for primarily, right? And I think that's not a solution to these tensions, but it's just acknowledging that, like, you know, as a student, you're not crazy for thinking that some of what's going on here is inconsistent, but just take what you can from it and apply it elsewhere.
I love that. And it's interesting because in ISP, we do experiential learning and praxis-based learning, so that we go into the field and actually see social injustice and social justice in action, whether it's through art, whether it's through nonprofit organizations, museums, different plays, right? And then we come back into the classroom and talk about how the theories we're learning actually there's a discrepancy between what's happening in the field and the theories we're learning or not, or how to apply them. So I really appreciate you saying that it's very much, we try to integrate actually what's happening in the real world into the classroom as much as possible, so that it's a place where we're applying, right, our theories to real life situations and seeing where the discrepancies are.
Ida, do you want to say something?
I think Professor Green touched on a really important point in regards to grading and sort of negotiating or like guiding with students on how the curriculum or even like the grading rubric should look like. And it kind of took me aback a little bit, because growing up as a kid, not only in John Jay, but even in high school, like the idea of negotiating with the teacher on how you should be graded as a student it's kind of jarring for me, because it's the first, because I was so used to, okay, I do my work, teacher determines my grade. As long as I do my work, I should get a certain grade. But that's not really the case, especially when so many students have various different learning styles, and especially when it comes to sort of like not grade distribution, but how sort of certain aspects of your grade are determined. I've seen like from my classmates, like professors focus on, well, this test, you can't pass this class. And I find that to be very absurd to some degree, where it's like you're putting so much pressure and at times like so much anxiety on students to do well on that one assignment. It kind of like strips away the learning experience in the first place. So I found that really interesting. And the idea of, because I'm taking my capstone right now and my professor does things ungraded, which is similar to how Professor Green sort of presented how we talk about your grade and we see like the learning that you've done throughout the semester. And even that was odd for me, because for over my entire educational life, that's never happened before. And it's only just now that I'm learning about it. And it's so bizarre. Like maybe for other students, they may have been used to it to some degree, but at least for me and a lot of my other classmates, it's very odd, and it's kind of almost sad to some degree that it is odd, because we are here to learn and here to grow and sort of make change outside of the classrooms, but we can't do that when we're so focused on, if I don't do well in this essay or if I don't pass this test, like where's my sort of career gonna take me?
Richard?
Yeah, my first comment is I hope you're getting feedback, even if you're not getting grades. I think what I'm not going to say anything terribly interesting here, but it's such an interesting conversation, because already within 10 minutes, there's so many different categories of social justice coming up. And so what I was trying to say at the beginning was to try and create a sort of flat classroom. So where I think what our students always sort of need is a sense of their own confidence that they belong here. And that's a sort of social justice issue. But there there's a social justice grading issue here, and there's that idea, Masabika, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, and I apologize if I'm not, but this idea of how do we run a classroom where students can then go on and create social justice? And so it almost would be better. I'm almost getting confused. There's so many categories of social justice we're touching on. But it also, like, this is what Ida said, I think is super important, is this, how do you incorporate social justice or justice into grading or into evaluation? Because I've always tried to tell my students, it's not a message that gets through all the time, but don't think about your grades, think about the feedback. I try to do a piece of work every week. You do it, you get feedback, you try to improve on that thing. And so it's a continual sort of polishing of the stone throughout the semester. And it's where you end up. It's not where you begin. And the just way to do that, it seems to me, is to be always giving a lot of feedback to students rather than grades. And actually, it almost would be better to ditch the grades and just keep giving feedback. But I think I'd probably have a revolt in my classroom if I ditched that, because the students always want to know, where's my grade? Where's my grade? What is my grade? I'm always saying, just focus on, like, addressing any of the weaknesses you have as a writer, as someone who uses evidence, all these sort of things. So you're always trying to get better. Anyway, I think one thing would be really useful is to create almost like, rather than having one big piece of paper, lots of little post-its that all have covered different parts of what a just classroom looks like.
That's great feedback. Thank you, Richard. I think we are going to get in the next exercise that we're going to do together. We will get into some of the ways that you can structure this into your classroom as part of the infrastructure. Adriana, should we move on?
Let's move on to the questions, right?
Yeah, that was a wonderful discussion. And we'll come back to this when we get to the end and we're applying some of the themes that we learned through our research around what social justice oriented teaching is. I think it's actually much more comprehensive and cohesive than you may think. Great. So one of the things that we do in our classes is something called norms, and we employ something called parallel process, which is we do something, today in this workshop, we're going to do an exercise that we actually already do in our classroom, so we can reflect here, doing it with each other, about how it could learn in the classroom space. And so we're going to do our own norms and agreements. And the way we do it in the class is asking folks the difference between a norm and a rule. And anyone want to just take a stab at that?
Isn't that the sort of legal de jure and de facto or whatever?
Yeah, exactly.
I think I'm always learning that from my co-teachers.
Exactly. So a norm, right? So the law, right, is something that is written, right? And what we're going to discuss today is, how do we create a safe and supportive learning environment? What norms do we need in order to create a safe and supportive and socially just learning environment? And you alluded to some things already, Richard, when you talked about giving consistent feedback, being concrete and transparent about how we do grading, right? Mm-hmm. So those are things that you can, when you are in your classroom, you can discuss. But what do we need today, just in this workshop for the next 40 minutes, 35 minutes? What do we need in order to have a open discussion and feel comfortable sharing what it's like being a student, what it's like being a professor? And we have folks that are actually in classes with teachers who are in this space right now.
One of the things that I do, and I haven't had a way to figure out how to set it up yet for the team teaching class that I'm doing at John Jay, but at Barnard, I end up, one of the things I do at the beginning of the semester is I set up either I use Jamboard or I use Padlet, and I set up a sort of community standards Jamboard, and I ask students to help me fill it out, and it's just like, 5 pages or 5 spaces or slides for them to just put post-its and remarks, and they're all anonymous. But it's things like the questions involved, I think, speak to what Nina is asking us to think about right here. part of it has to do with being clear about what our expectations are of the students, but also what their expectations are of us, like what they hope we will do for them in the classroom. And sometimes, and that turns out to be a more complicated question than you would think, but like I'll have like a page that people can put post-its on that that starts with I expect Professor Carter to ... and then they can sort of fill it in, and the answers are all very different, but and then sometimes I can look at the answers and I can come back to students and say, well, I can't do that. And so it'll be something sort of impossible, like return feedback within a day of submission of assignments or some otherworldly expectation like that. But usually it's a way to get a good conversation going about what the students are coming into the space with in terms of expectations, which sometimes they haven't even articulated until you give them a chance to, and then you can sort of talk about what's reasonable, what's just, what's fair, what's not possible, and what will add to a richer sort of classroom experience too.
I love that, Christy. And it really speaks to what you're talking about, Amy and Richard, around that grade transparency, right? And acknowledging the power difference. And how do we want to communicate about grades in this classroom space? And how do we want to communicate about feedback? I love, Christy, that you said that. Returning feedback in a day, for instance, promising that you'll grade papers within a week after, right? And if not, you let students know and be transparent about how and why that happened. Just like we ask students to say if they're going to have a paper that's going to be late, right? So having that reciprocity around the expectations. Anybody else want to take a stab of what we need to do to create a supportive and safe socially just learning environment, and what our norms would be potentially for this space, even just in the next 40 minutes, how we want to communicate, as well as in your classrooms?
I'm thinking that it's very different in this space. Wait, first I wanted to say what response to what Christy said. We do a very similar thing. In fact, this semester, I'm teaching with Adriana, and we created a class agreement at the beginning of the semester. And now that the students are working in groups on their final projects, we reshared the agreement and asked them to check in with their teammates on their projects to see if they are upholding the agreement within the thing. So not only creating that agreement, but enforcing it. But what I'm thinking about is when we ask students for ideas, their ideas come from their prior experience, which is banking, right? So, and this dependence on grades and grades are important. I mean, if you want to do something after college, your grades will make a difference. But I agree with Richard that I'm much more interested in what they're experiencing, what they're learning than the number. And I think that's such a flimsy way to really assess what students learn. But I'm thinking we have to kind of help them see that the experiences that they've had are perhaps forms of oppression, and that if we want to break those forms of oppression, we have to rethink the relationship. We talk about a flat classroom, right? An egalitarian classroom where it's not us judging you. But ultimately that is what it is, right? Because we do ultimately give them grades, unless we were to make the whole program pass fail. And I think students would be disappointed because they want those good grades. So it's sticky.
Great points. I like what you said about trying to cultivate a space of no judgment, of open communication. Yes, please.
I think another aspect of this list of norms we're coming up with is flexibility within the curriculum. So not always going by what the syllabus says every week. I think ISP does this well, and one of my major professors did this well. I don't recall, I think it was last year, we were supposed to have like a discussion on this article. We ended up discussing current events throughout the whole time, and even though it wasn't what we're supposed to discuss, it was in relation to what we were studying, and it actually sort of allowed us to have a dialogue and rapport with each other. And we actually managed to learn a lot more within that 90-minute space, which I think is a good thing.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's definitely a norm within ISP and in our classes that we talk about from the beginning. And that we also invite student feedback about adding source materials, about being co-facilitators, sharing prompts, so that that invitation to not just be co-learners, but co-facilitators in the space, and norming that from the beginning.
I was just going to say, I think, I mean, I've always thought almost not the opposite, but I think I always have an obligation to sort of have my students really be as clear and upfront with my students at the beginning of the semester. So I've always tried to really make very solid syllabi with all the stuff in it, and kind of stick to it, because I don't want to confuse the students. I think that to sort of move around, and I've had students complain to me about, the professor doesn't stick to the syllabus, and it can be really confusing. I come having read this, and then they change it, and suddenly there's a test next week, and all these sort of things. And I think, again, this is sort of, is it just to be flexible? Yes. Is it also important to be to make sure that everyone's on the same page and understands what's expected of them? And that seems also important and just to me. And so I take Ida's point, and I hope I am a flexible teacher, but how you, again, what we're running up against with so many of these conversations is how you marry two sort of competing ideas, both of which have both of which can be sort of seen as just.
I think that in that particular regard, I think the key would be, because I agree with both, with the notion that it's great to have flexibility, and with also the notion that you need to kind of like follow what you present. But I think the key is listening to where the students are going. Like sometimes you definitely feel like the students are like, when something big happens in the world or the city, you see that the conversations kind of like go that way. And it's that would be great if you are an attentive listener to your students' concerns at the moment, and make room for that would be awesome, would be, I guess, a just thing. The same way that also sticking to what you said for the sake of stability and respect for their time and their planning would be just in another case, I guess.
I actually,
Kirsty, please.
I was going to say, I think this has everything to do with these expectations and like sort of making clear, like getting a clear sense early on what students do expect. And you might find out that many of the students are like, I need a schedule and I need you to stick to it. And this is my life right now. And like, don't mess with it. If you can somehow build into the syllabus a clear indication that sometimes things will be moved around, but that we'll always like let students know well ahead of time. But like Richard said, it really is, this is where the tension lies, is it has to do with the training of students themselves as students coming into the classroom and what they think that's going to mean. And if we start to get, sort of loosey-goosey about things that they have understood, for the last 20 years as looking a certain way, it can get very sort of jarring for them. And so I think that making clear the expectations. The other thing that I try to get from my students, and I talk to them about in terms of what it looks like on my end, is I ask them to think about what their commitments to the class are and what their commitments to each other will be in the class. And then I can tell them about what my commitments are to them, and that will include things like, transparency about expectations and grades and things like that. But you can get a lot of stuff on the table. I mean, it might be like a mess of a table once you get it all out there, and then you have to like, negotiate some set of agreements about it. But a lot of times, like the flexibility thing is great, but if it, like having flexibility thrown at you can like seem as like unfair and unjust as like somebody being a stickler for deadlines. So yeah, I think that it's all like the front loading, I guess, is what it is, right?
Agreed, in the shared expectations. I want to really
Yeah.
shift because we haven't gotten to this issue of safe and supportive, and that's really critical with norms, and especially with what was happening with the pandemic and so many people being in crisis and what was happening around the election and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think gave us a lot of lessons around what that means truly to be able to address the effective needs of ourselves and students in the classroom. And it really speaks to what you were saying, Musabika, about the vulnerability and the risk, right? So how are, and I just want two examples because we do have more we want to go over with you that we hope will be really helpful. But just two examples of what creates that safe and supportive space for us to be vulnerable and to share that personal experience that Richard mentioned is really useful for us to understand ourselves in the context of theories and policy and practice, right? How do we create that? Let's get two examples of how you do that, or a student. It'd be great to hear from Emily and Ida about what that looks like for you, and then from a faculty as well.
I'd also be interested to hear from them as ambassadors and Ida's a peer success coach, not only what you've experienced, but what are you witnessing when you're in our classrooms?
Do you want me to go first, Ada or Ida?
Go ahead. I've been talking a lot.
All right. Well, most of the part, when talking to students in the ISP department classes, they haven't given me much complaint of professors and them not being able to do their jobs. It's mostly coming from like departments that are outside of ISP, like they're assigning too much reading, or they're assigning deadlines that are coming too fast, and they expect us to do all these things before the next class. Like, I understand it because I'm a full-time student. I know what it feels like to be a full-time student and have other responsibilities. The thing is that I'm really lucky for, or grateful for, is that I have 2 ISP classes that I'm taking this semester. So it's been helping me with juggling my responsibilities outside of school and my responsibilities in school. Because the ISP department allows me to focus on giving good work that I've gone through over and over, instead of just handing in an assignment every week. I think quality is better in the ISP department because I am able to work on my project through the semester. I'm able to get feedback on assignments that I didn't really think I'd do great on. So there's a lot of things that go into making a safe, supportive learning environment. Professors are definitely the key component, but it also falls on students to help professors understand what they need to do to better themselves. Like I have had like conversations with professors that I feel like push me a little bit too far in the work, and I communicate with them. I tell them I'm not going to be able to give this to you because I'm just busy with my other classes as well. I hope you understand. Most of the time they understand. Sometimes they can just say stick with the deadline, or but
Excellent, Emily. Thank you for sharing that. That was rich.
I definitely second everything that Emily said, especially since I'm a SAS peer success coach in Professor Green and Professor Perez's seminar. A lot of the ISP classes that they're taking are very easygoing, pretty flexible, and especially because it's the first freshman class that is mostly doing hybrid courses. So it's their first time getting experience on campus. And from my understanding, the ISP professors have been very understanding of how the transition could be really like jarring because they were online and now they're back in person, and the shift, it's very difficult. And I think a lot of other professors to some degree had this expectation of you have to adapt really quickly because once you enter that campus building, we're going to hit the ground running with everything. And I think with the whole chaotic start for this semester, it was chaotic for everyone. Even though it's my 4th year, it was chaotic for me because it's my last year, and obviously I'm expected to hit the ground running already because there's an expectation that I should be used to this, but no one is used to anything. I'm pretty sure professors who are teaching in person for the first time in a while sort of have this expectation of they have to hit the ground running at some point. So It has been very difficult, especially because we are still in a pandemic setting, but we're in person. So hopefully like the spring will be better, but it's going to take a lot of time for students to get used to the flexibility of doing both online and in person, but slowly transitioning to some degree of normalcy in a learning environment that they're comfortable in. But it's all like a waiting game, and circling back to, I don't remember who said it earlier, but the bureaucracy of how John Jay and CUNY operates and the lack of communication within that bureaucratic agency is a bit, it can be a bit stressful, especially for students who tend to receive the info last and professors who are receiving info from various sources. So I think if we can create a norm where, obviously Nino just wrote it down, of understanding external stresses and where information is coming from, can definitely help our students know that we're going to be there to support them regardless of where their information is coming from.
Excellent. Ida, thank you for sharing that. And maybe we could hear from one professor quickly about what that means, a safe and supportive environment to address that affective needs of the students. And as Ida said, to address for us to be understanding, what norm do we need so that we can express that understanding and allow, again, as Musabika shared, that ability for us to take risks together as faculty and students and be vulnerable together as faculty and students. Anyone want to share?
Are you wait? Oh, I'm happy to say so. I mean, I don't know that I succeed at this all the time. I think the key to this, to creating any sort of mutually beneficial, supportive environment, is open communication, and I think that's why some of us struggle, is keeping that open communication between. We don't always get open communication from the administration. We don't always communicate too well between each other. And I mean, how many times have we had students who have a problem and they haven't told us about it? And how do we? I mean, I think, you know, honestly, I just sort of, I've not given up, but I've just decided I'm going to be patient with my students, and I'm going to just believe them. And when they say things like, "Oh, my dog ate my homework," I'm going to say, "Okay, well, that was bad of your dog. So let's try and find a way to move forward through this." And to sort of, I think I think it's important to be available, and to be patient, and it's creating that sort of communication with students is always something I've struggled with, and maybe I don't create a safe enough space in my classrooms for that. But it's I think the norms have to be that students believe that you will listen to them and take them seriously. And I think it is really hard to create that in a sort of majority sense, so that everyone actually believes that, even if you sort of swear blind that you're like that. It's amazing how many students just don't. They're not being that they're somehow afraid to talk to you. Maybe they feel that they might be seen as getting things wrong, or not being able to. I don't know, but it's a struggle.
And Richard, this activity I have found, doing it the first day, like right up front, really helps that open up that conversation and creates that atmosphere where students seem to then participate more, ask more questions, be more vulnerable, be more transparent, and so that this is a tool. All right, let's go on to our next.
And it's the kind I'm jumping in, the kind
Please.
of thing, you know, where the inoculation model isn't enough. You can't just have that conversation on the first day.
Exactly, I love that. Yeah.
You know, you got to go back to it and live it, and hold each other accountable, including them holding us accountable. And I just want to throw in one more thing about flexibility, because I used to be it's on the syllabus is done, we're doing it this way. And the only thing I got out of my online teaching training was this idea that you don't have to release the folder until the week before, right? So our syllabus says this is a tentative plan. Depending on what you guys find interesting, what you don't, we are going to shift. The real story will always be in the weekly folder. And so far we haven't gotten much pushback, although just this week we had a funny, I'd love to hear what Ida thought about it. We've been doing one topic pretty intensely for quite a few weeks. And we finally said to them, do you want to keep going with this, or do you want to switch to another topic? And one student said, I want to stick with it. And everybody else wanted to switch. And of course, we had lots of plans to draw on because we had this big syllabus to draw on. And so we're shifting gears because, you know, sometimes what's fascinating to us is enough already for them. So I think that's another form of flexibility. Like, it's okay if they don't want to do this anymore. There's not a test. They're not getting a license in interdisciplinary studies where we have to do, you know, what we plan. Because if they're not interested, let's bring their interests to the fore.
Yeah.
Love it. I love that. And I love that you talk about bringing the norms back up with your final group project and how you're organizing that. It's wonderful. I love it. Great. Thank you, everybody, so much for sharing.
Okay. Should we go into our the brainstorm and discussion?
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, we still have time for that. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So I think a lot of the things that we've been discussing throughout this workshop have been answered through the discussion questions. So I think the first question I will pose for everyone is, how can education be unjust in the classrooms for our students? So you can answer in the chat, you can raise your hand on Zoom, you can unmute yourself.
Great question.
Thinking back to what we've been saying, rigidity can be unjust, and especially rigidity about power.
I would say when students are treated as objects.
I would go back to expectations again. We come in sometimes with very sort of flat expectations based on our own experience of what we, you know, just assume students know how to do, or they know what the words mean when they come out of our mouth, and sometimes they really don't mean what we think they mean to everyone. So it has to do, a lot of this injustice does have to do with expectation. I think that goes back to rigidity as well, I think, as Amy put it.
Great. Do you want to ask the next one?
Yeah, so the next question is, how do these examples relate to overall forms of oppression, class, race, ethnicity, gender, religion, immigration status, ability, sexuality, and nationality?
That's a big question.
When you talked about
everyone needs to have agency, I suppose, is and if you, I mean, in my example, students as objects, if you're not giving them agency, they're just things. They're not active participants in, and that's, you know, the problem of class is that you treat the working class and lower classes as a race. Black people are objects. The same with all these sort of things. You have to create equality, and you can only create equality through agency, I suppose.
This is so corny, but humanity, to recognize the humanity of everyone in the room. I think this relates to all of the things that we're talking about, right? I'm a person, and I'm very vulnerable with my students. You know, if things I can do, can't do, trouble I had, you know, if you're right, Nina, if I can't grade an assignment by the next class, I email them and I say, I'm so sorry, I'll have this, you know, whatever. But that part of their humanity is their identity, and that their identities have shaped their experience, and that we want to hear those specific perspectives and experiences, not that we ask for them, but that we make an environment in which they know that their perspective, their individual experience is important, valid, and related to these larger themes.
And I'd actually want to add to that. I mean, this is one of the things that gets complicated, is that some of the, the categories that Emily included here, the communities and the families that some of the students come from, those settings have not given them a vocabulary for understanding what Amy just said, that they do have something to say, that there is something worthwhile in their perspective. It's not a language that they know how to use. So it's not enough for us to simply say, we value your opinion, we value your input, we value your experience. We have to talk about what that looks like, what it looks like to share that, because many of our students have never had anyone invite them to do so, and they don't know how to do that. And so we can't assume that sort of our comfort with sharing, like, that's a system of thinking, that's a discourse in and of itself. That many students grow up. I mean, I think about my own sort of upbringing and my own household, and what I was taught was appropriate for me to say out loud and what was not, and all that stuff. And I had to really kind of get retrained in college, and then I would come home and be rude to my parents in ways that they had never seen before. So I think the invitation is important, the invitation for us to give to students to bring their experience, and the invitation that we offered to sort of say, we recognize your value, that's important. But there's a whole other set of steps that also has to come with that, which is like, what does it mean to share that? What does it mean to speak for yourself? What does it mean to do something with your own experience? What does it mean to even know that parts of your experience are worth noting? Because a lot of students, I know I personally, when I was, coming to college, but I know a lot of my students have the same feeling. So it's a whole process, I think, that we have to think about how to get into the classroom.
Kristen, you just did it as a perfect bridge to the next question. Sorry, Adriana, please.
No, I just want to say that it's also like one of the things in which we can be unjust really is like sort of like trying to put pressure onto those processes. I think that's something that I know that I did a lot of when I was starting. I know that I commit many mistakes still, but trying to pressure students into going this as though this was something easy to understand and to process and to rehearse even, So yes, I think I agree with what you said a lot. I don't think I had articulated like that, but I totally relate. Musabika, of course, go ahead.
I think what Kristen just said really responds to my comment towards the beginning, which was about placing this burden on students. And I think often what happens is that students are expected to relive their trauma over and over again for the benefit, not just of educating the other students, but of educating the professor. And to add on to that, what Kristen said about students haven't been trained for this. And so I think there is merit to creating a flat classroom or something like that, but I think it's really important that students aren't expected to be experts just by virtue of having certain experiences, and that they are provided with the tools and the knowledge that they need to be able to articulate those experiences and turn them into scholarship.
Yeah, excellent.
I think we're talking about I think this idea of re-traumatization, students always have to be able to have the option of not responding or not dealing, or opting out of something that feels threatening. But I think we're also talking about scaffolding exposure, right? And providing opportunities that are higher and lower exposure, not only over the course of the semester, but even within a class period. Sometimes they're doing private writing, and that's very low exposure. And those who choose to share. And then some activities are higher exposure because we're all doing them together. But kind of titrating that level of exposure, I think, helps create safety.
Great. We are at time, but we do want to conclude. I know Adriana has got some wonderful pieces to share around our foundational pedagogy related to social justice, as well as some a study that was done with Adriana and Hyasu, and some findings and themes from that study that we think will be useful as tools in the classroom.
Yeah. So do we wanna read from Freire?
We don't have time. We're at time right now.
We're at time, right? Okay.
Yeah. So maybe you could just kind of do a conclusion overview summary.
Okay. No, it's okay. So I'll jump into the research if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that we were curious about is, because during the pandemic, we noticed that there were certain things that were working really well in our classes, even when they translated, they were forced to be done remotely, for example. So we noticed that there was a lot worth exploring in terms of what ISP was doing. That was paired with a research that Hyasu Enciso, a former colleague, and me were doing with, interviewing some faculty members about their teaching style, about what they thought were doing in terms of social justice pedagogy, but also what they thought their principles of their pedagogical principles were. And we found incredible, examples and ideas about it. But two things that we we saw that many of the ideas and the experiences, the examples faculty talked about fell into two main categories of findings. One of them is disrupting systemic inequality, and the other is power shifting. It's really, it was really consistent that the professors in general very consciously try to, through various ways, try to get at systemic inequality. And the other thing is our co-teaching model, the way we bring students in, the way we try to invite them to co-create with us, really translated very well into even a remote model that helped them keep a level of agency in what we were doing. And, I don't know if there, I'm sorry, I know that we are out of time. I think that Emily and
Ida time for, yes, exactly.
Yeah, Emily and Ida had great examples of that, so I'll let them finish. Yeah.
Well, I guess I can share first. In terms of disrupting systemic inequality, I think definitely creating a relationship with the students through various discussion forums, whether that's in a discussion board or even in the classroom, really does help sort of disrupt the inequality within the classroom. We not only learn from each other, but we learn outside of the classrooms as well. And I think it's really important. I think another thing that ISP does do well is when it comes to final projects, they allow students to creatively express themselves. So you can give them a topic, but they can use that topic into various avenues, whether that's creating a PowerPoint or a traditional paper, or making a poster board or creating a video. And I found that from a lot of my classmates who have taken ISP, the fact they're given so much creative freedom to sort of create these projects makes them want to keep coming back.
I agree with Ida. As one of those students that enjoy the projects ISP gives, I agree with that. Disrupting systematic inequality in the classroom. ISP does a really good job of doing that because it allows students to lead classes other than just sit and take notes. Students are given problems to solve basically, and are given the tools to try and figure out not just one solution, but many. So that's something that's very helpful in disrupting the inequality of the classroom. The final projects and the creative output, or having an outlet to do things like that, is also something that helps, like Ida said.
And Ida, you talked about the co-teaching before.
Yeah, so the power shifting, co-teaching is something that I've seen a lot of in ISP. all of my classes were co-teached. And I can see that most professors, they knew exactly what the topic was that they were talking about, but there was also new information being put in from like one professor to the other through the students. You know, it was just coming all at different angles, different perspectives, and it allowed for the student to really see the topic fully instead of just having one professor just tell them information. You know, I think I really appreciated having two professors. It helped me get more involved in the classroom because I felt more comfortable with two professors. I felt like I could communicate more, and the power shifting was equal through the three of us, the two professors and myself.
I think
Wonderful,
another
thank you.
aspect of power shifting is not only that there's two professors, but the idea of some ISP classes actually sit in a circle as opposed to a traditional sort of lecture style classroom, as opposed to the teacher being in the front, the students are absorbing the information like sponges. When you're sitting in a circle, like the professors get to see all of the students and sort of not just the dynamics between the student and the professor, but actually the students interacting with each other, allowing room for more discussions and for more growth.
Unfortunately, that's one of the sort of side effects of the pandemic is they sort of put all those tables, like line them up in rows and told us not to move them. Like there's some rooms that we're teaching in where we can't do that. We do have people move around, but you're right. The space itself is really a key element here. Yeah.
We move them anyway, and then we try to remember to put them back the way they're supposed to be. But yeah, some rules.
We just don't have enough space in the.
I know.
In the room.
Right.
Great. Anybody else? Do you want to share with the folks in the room how these themes may work in your classrooms, or how you think they're useful, or other examples of this power shifting, of this disrupting inequality?
I want to say something that we didn't say before, but I just want to throw out that one of the biggest ways in which I think lately I've been thinking, okay, this is exactly when I really need to work on, trying to work towards dismantling systemic inequality. It's like acknowledging my role with all who I am as a person at all my levels, right? Who I am, ethnically and racially, and recognizing, acknowledging my intersectionalities to be more of a whole human and opening up to other whole humans, but also being honest about it and being honest about what all those my intersectionalities, sort of like what are the defaults of my situation, and being more transparent about that and taking responsibility for who I am and how I read situations has also been illuminating to me in this regard.
I love it. So acknowledging how our intersectional identities interact with our students' identities and taking responsibility.
Right.
Great. Anybody else want to share about how these themes work for you as students, as professors? If folks want to share other examples of how this looks concretely in a classroom as a modality or as a class assignment. And we know that we're pretty much speaking to the converted in a lot of ways, because this has become an ISP workshop about social justice pedagogy for ISP faculty and Musabika, which we're very happy to have. But it's so fun because we don't get to have these conversations in our staff meetings and our departmental meetings with our students, led by students. So I hope that we can take this further, and would love to get feedback from everybody in this space about how we can enhance this and how we can take it to more faculty at John Jay.
I think there's a message in the fact that we're the only people here. Because I think that, I'm not surprised. I'm sad, but I'm not surprised, because there's resistance and resentment from other departments for who we are and what we do. And it's very tricky for us to proselytize. I'd love to, but I don't know how many faculty outside our department are going to be attracted to hearing our message.
And I think this is a conversation we can have with Gina Foster as well, is that our faculty, this time of year is really hard. Our faculty feeling inundated by all the things happening during community hour to attend, and
it's
in balance with and it's Friday, so I think there's lots of questions about why the attendance is the way it is and so on. So it's a good question. It's an important question.
I think it's also, I think that, you talk to other people around the college, and I'm very conscious. I don't want to walk around and say ISP is great and we do everything perfectly. I don't think that's the case. But I think that most people around the college think that they do quite a good job teaching. And I think that most of the people around the college think that they run just classrooms. Now, they may be different from what we do. I'm more interested in what the students think about those classrooms than we might think about them. But we also, the reality is, whatever a great job Gina does and the Teaching and Learning Center does, is we're at a college where nobody's judged on their teaching. No one is judged. That plenty of sort of lip service is given to teaching in the P&B process, but we all know if you're a brilliant teacher and don't publish an article, you'll get canned within the first few years. It's just not a college wherein teaching is a place that is, it may well be valued, and certainly there's plenty of places where in the college where it's valued, but it will not advance you. It will not earn you a penny more in salary. It will not get you promoted. It will not get you tenured. And this is a reality that I really wish the college could address in some way, so that teaching is actually really one of the legs of the stool that gets us towards promotion and tenure, and that it has to be a demonstrable part of what your job is. I know that this college wants to think of itself as Harvard on the Hudson, but we're a teaching college. We teach the young people of New York City, and we need to take that more seriously in how we think about ourselves and judge ourselves.
And I think, Richard, too, setting up in terms of ISP, I love those points. It's so wonderful. And it's, again, the norms for tenure and promotion and how they only relate to scholarship as priority. This is what I'm trying to do in this social justice fellowship, is that I want to co-create and co-learn from everybody. I know we have so much more to learn from faculty across departments at John Jay about how to teach effectively. And I really hope that we can be facilitators of that rather than, like you said, the experts of it. It's just opening up the conversation, and it's hard.
Yeah, I just to go back, to link.
I think everyone has a lot to learn from everybody else.
Exactly.
We need to create spaces where people will attend.
Yeah, we have to figure out how to do that.
Gina? And part of that does have to do with this goes back to the CUNY question, the CUNY problem, but also just the like what else needs to come into a socially just educational space. And I do think, and this is of course, again, I know I'm speaking preaching to the converted here, but I'm also speaking from my own position. But the adjunctification of the institution is very, very much a part of all of this. And when I come in, I've been teaching for almost 30 years, but CUNY doesn't believe anything. It doesn't give me any credit for any of that experience at all. And luckily for me, I found ISP. So for instance, Katie is trying to help me put together a portfolio so that I can get promoted to associate adjunct. But it's still like, there's not a lot of money involved, but there's not a lot of stability involved, and it has to do with this devaluation of teaching and experience. I think the students, I know that we've in various points like tried to bring in and make clear to students to understand the form of the institution, but I think talking to students about the institutional structure is part of the socially just classroom space too, because it's a screwed up structure. But anyway.
Well, and it's about us doing the same thing we're talking about, these themes that came out of the classrooms, right? And why students felt like we created a socially just environment during the pandemic. It's exactly what we need, taking these themes, right, to broader bureaucratic structures on disrupting inequality, right? And figuring out how to shift the power.
Yeah.
Around what we prioritize, around how we treat adjuncts, how we create hierarchies as faculty and as administrators. Right.
And how much can we disrupt within, I mean, CUNY advertises itself as we lift the working class. And that makes us a socially just institution. But if you use a magnifying, there's an awful lot that ain't just, but it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Guys, I have to go put some socks
Me
on and go
too.
pick up my daughter. So,
I like
lovely.
the hair, by the way, Richard. I think you should schlick it. I think that the schlick Rick.
Well, I just got out the shower, so
I know.
it's my week.
So
It's my
great.
Friday look.
Thank
Take
you,
care, guys.
Ida and Emily, for co-facilitating.
you.
You're awesome.
Yes,
Thank you,
Ida.
Emily.
Look forward
Thank
to
you,
doing
Ida.
this again with you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Learned so much
Thank
from
you.
everybody. Thank you. Great work.
Bye.
Great
Bye-bye.
questions.